So, hello everyone, welcome back. This is a wonderful article, and I'm really excited about this. And I read some of those nuggets that are up there already on the Canvas site, and it seems a lot of you also are very intrigued by this. Uh, Very excited maybe to try some of these things in your own classrooms. So I'm going to have to be careful here because I'm also very I love comics, always have. I want to also be critical though, right? Not do some of the stuff we've read about already, right? Being a little less than critical when we're talking about something we enjoy. But anyway, the title of this is Up, Up, and Away, Superman in the Composition Classroom by Alex Romagnoli. Romagnoli? Romagnoli. And anyway, there's quite a bit of material here. It's a very short piece, but there's a lot of pretty deep thought and things we could discuss at length in this chapter. And so I call this the good, the bad, and the ugly. Uh, and I'm not sure that he's aware of this, but I was kind of surprised that he didn't mention a book called Understanding Rhetoric. If there's a book by Scott McCloud called Understanding Comics, where McCloud, you might have read this, it's really, really good, highly recommended. But in that book, McCloud talks about comics and how they work, sort of what their potential is and all this stuff, but he does it in the form of a comic. Well, the Losh and Alexander and a couple of comic artists got together and they did the same thing for a first year composition rhetoric text. So I'll let you, if you come by my office, I'll show it to happily show it to you, and I can get you a copy of it as well through the publisher. But it's basically a first year composition textbook in the form of a comic, and I've been using that for years now, and students love it, and I highly recommend it to you. Just to look at, if nothing else. But anyway, why even bother with this, right? Graphic novels, comics, whatever you want to call them, aren't those just for kids? We're kind of, there's still some people that think that way. But it seems like we're kind of warming up to the idea that maybe these aren't just for kids, right? They could serve some other purposes. He says here, the graphic novels are a way to, quote, access students' multi-literacies and multiple intelligences. They are, quote, an evolution in the ways stories and experiences are shared and discussed in English class. So quite a bit to unpack here. We'll get into the multi-literacy stuff in a moment when we talk about the new media group. But I was thinking, too, about an English classroom. I think I'm probably a little bit spoiled and maybe you are too, I don't know. But in a lot of these classrooms, we have computers, we have projectors, we can show YouTube videos, we got all this sort of technology at our fingertips. And maybe other teachers don't have that kind of technology, and maybe the students don't have something like that when they go home. One thing about a comic book or a graphic novel, just like any book, right? You don't really require any other technology other than the book itself. So I think he didn't really talk about that part of this, but I'm thinking there's definitely some teaching situations I can imagine where you wouldn't have the luxury of all this other technology. But a comic book or a graphic novel would be a pretty cost-effective way to get at some of these multi-literacies that he's talking about here. Let's see what else we have. This was kind of a troublesome point for me. He talked about how, I guess there's a certain angst amongst professors or instructors. Maybe they're sort of okay with the idea of using a graphic novel in their composition classroom, college classroom, or maybe high school classroom. But they don't want to just use any old comic, right? They want something with a bit of literary merit to it, something that won't be so scrutinized, I guess. And of course, I think he's right. I know people here at St. Cloud State that have used comics, and it's usually the same, the usual suspects, if you will: Mouse, Persepolis, Watchmen, maybe Swamp Thing. There's a couple of these sort of I don't know what you call them. I guess sort of literature in the form of a comic, very sophisticated narratives, very serious subject matter, especially Mouse. And anybody that's read those, you don't really have to you don't have to argue with them about it. I mean, it's pretty clear from the get-go how powerful these things are. So anyway, people seem okay with bringing those in. But I think the author is right. We might be okay with those, but we're ignoring all of these traditional superhero comics, even though those are by far more popular with comics, the comic public. Think about Sunday comics in the Sunday paper. I guess they're in all newspapers, right? Anyway, those newspaper comics. So anyway, the point is, somebody who would be okay with mouse in the classroom might question this All-Star Superman comic being in there instead. There seems to be some snubbing, intellectual snobbery, if you will. And I would say some of that is probably justified. I mean, let's face it, some of these comics are very juvenile and simplistic. But nevertheless, some of them are a lot more sophisticated than you would expect. And I think the author's example here of the All-Star Superman's a good example. Yeah, there's superheroes in there. And yes, they're not necessarily, it's not a Watchmen type situation, right? But there's still quite a bit of depth to it. And we shouldn't be hesitant to bring in, anything. I was thinking, he didn't really talk a lot about the Sunday funny comics sort of thing, but I've certainly used a Family Circus. There's Garfield, of course. There's a couple of them that are, something like Doonesbury obviously has some political connotations. But anyway, you can do a lot with these Sunday comics in terms of talking about gender issues, for example, heteronormativity and what have you. And the fact that everyone's familiar with that and seems kind of comfortable with those comics, it can make those conversations a little easier, a little less intimidating. So anyway, why not Superman, or why Superman? Why not Superman? He talked about this, and we talked about this as well, right? You want to bring a piece of venerable literature and put that on your syllabus, Homer's Odyssey. Who's really going to argue about that? Nobody's going to come up to you and say, Homer's Odyssey is not really important. It's not a real, I see no reason to read that. Somebody that said that, you just think they were being either joking with you or they were just very naive or something. However, you might say, okay, I'm fine with the Odyssey, but it is true that to teach a text like that, it's going to require a lot of a setup time, a lot of preparation. You probably wouldn't just throw it in front of the students and tell them, there it is, go ahead and read it, because they won't understand a lot of stuff that's going on there, right? And he talked about how you can learn a lot about values and morality, things about society by reading this, a lot of philosophical stuff. On the other hand, you do have to compensate you're always having to compensate for the fact that it's, at least a couple thousand years old. I'm not sure exactly how old it is, but anyway, ancient text, very archaic nature. So there's a lot of, that stuff to work around. And he says, kind of controversially, that Superman text would be just as good at doing this work as the Odyssey, and you wouldn't have to do all this elaborate preparation before you could get into it. So I just want to stop right there. What do you think about this? Do you think you could just, okay, bye-bye Homer, hello Superman? Could the Superman comic do this work that you were trying to do, and teachers have tried to do with works like Homer's Odyssey? Okay, so moving forward, then I wanted to talk. And this New London group has come up repeatedly, so I would assume that if you wanted to do some work that involved technology or comics, I guess, or really any multi-literacy work, you could do a lot worse than to find the sources that he includes at the end of this article and learn more about the New London group. But seems to be the gist of it, right? As media evolves through technology, the ways in which audiences interact with media also changes. There isn't just one literacy, there are multiple: text, audio, video, etc. So I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and I wish I had more reading. I wish I had done more reading in the New London group. So, because right now it sort of seems to have a Marshall McLuhan-like vibe to it, and I'm not sure how accurate that is. So as media evolves through technology, the ways in which audiences interact with media also changes. And so when I think about this, my first thought is, say, if you look at a news channel today, it almost looks like a web page, right? All the stuff scrolling. You got literally have these different windows, information pop-ups all over the place. So that's probably a way that the media has evolved. The technology has evolved for sure. But what's key here is this idea of the audiences. Somebody watching, say, I got this CBS News on my Xbox One now. They just put that on there as one of the programs for Xbox One. So I could imagine that when I watch that CBS on my Xbox One, it's quite a different kind of interaction than my grandfather would have had watching CBS News back in the 50s, right? Uh, so it's sort of curious. You could think about this all day. Well, what exactly is different about it? How am I interacting differently with it? I suppose I could share that. If I saw a news article that wanted to share with you, I could just click a button there, maybe put it on Facebook. Obviously, there's a lot more channels I could watch. So anyway, I could go on all day with this. But anyway, the idea for us, I think what's important is if we accept this idea that we shouldn't just be there's many literacies, not just one literacy. There's literacies, not literacy with the singular, right? So if we buy that, okay, well, what is the role then? You're in a composition classroom. Traditionally, your job is to teach, basically 5-paragraph essays. So once you start adding in other things, say, well, I want to have an audio component. I want to have a comic book component. If you start adding all these other dimensions to it, where do you draw the line? Should you just get rid of the text and just do other things? I think the comic books are kind of interesting because you still have the text there. You have art plus the text. So anyway, what do you think about this quotation here? And assuming that you buy it, how do you think it should change what happens in a composition class? Okay, so then to finish up here, he talks about some activities that he wants to do with this book. And this is an example here. One of the problems I've had before with some of these pieces was that I felt like you could substitute anything else for the pop culture piece that they wanted to bring in, right? But here is and after reading some of the responses from the Project Runway article, I think now that, well, they're probably, if I was more familiar with the Project Runway, I would have been able to see that. So I've sort of reconsidered my position on that. But anyway, I know enough about Superman to sort of figure out what's going on. And I agree. You couldn't just, for example, say, well, why Superman? Why not Batman? Just for example. And I think if you're familiar with those comics, you'd say, well, it would be a totally different sort of enterprise. Much less saying, well, why Superman? Why not a television show like X-Files? So anyway, basically what I'm getting at is there definitely seems to be a good reason to go with this particular piece of pop culture. So what does he do with it? He has this prompt that he wants to use. So if you could do anything with anyone in your life for one day, who would it be and what would you do? And so I guess the idea is there you've read sort of what Superman would do, and when you think about what you would do, that would lead to all kinds of reflection, hopefully some critical thinking about not just Superman, but about your own life and experiences, right? It's pretty heavy stuff. And then he breaks us further down into a pretty standard process, right? I kind of wonder what those post-process people would think. But anyway, you got the standard sort of process there, pre-writing and so on. But he gives a couple other sample projects. Let me turn that off. He gives a couple other samples, projects, right? Talks about how you could analyze the themes here. You could talk about the relationships, characters, perspectives, otherness, going to bizarro world. For this, I would, if you're interested in this, I would recommend a book called The Rhetoric of Popular Culture by Sell Now. And she's got several different perspectives that you can use with Superman or pretty much any work of pop culture. And it would she's got writing assignments for each of those. So I think that's all my slides there. So again, what did you think about this article? He had a bit of a theoretical framework with the New London Group and everything, but I wonder if maybe you could be a little more critical of his framework and sort of the theory of where he's coming from. So uh, I guess I'll leave it there. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, and if you want to use All Star Superman in your classes, that would be exciting. But anyway, I'm about to go enjoy spring break now, as I hope you are. So see you next time.